Throughout most of World War II, Switzerland's skies remained calm, a tranquil contrast to the devastation that blanketed much of Europe. The country had managed, against all odds, to maintain a delicate stance of neutrality while surrounded by Axis powers and engulfed by a global conflict. And yet, despite its well-publicized non-involvement and consistent efforts to avoid entanglement, Switzerland found itself bombed, not by the Luftwaffe, but by Allied forces. From 1940 to 1945, Swiss cities, towns, and rail lines were struck multiple times by American and British aircraft. The result was dozens of civilian deaths, significant property damage, and diplomatic crises that tested the limits of Swiss neutrality. It remains one of the more controversial and misunderstood aspects of the war. The question still lingers: why would the Allies bomb a neutral country? The answer, like much of wartime history, lies in a complex web of strategic necessity, operational error, and unspoken warnings. Switzerland's geographical position placed it at the center of Europe, bordered on all sides by Nazi Germany or its occupied territories. Its airspace became a dangerous and crowded corridor through which Allied bombers flew en route to destroy targets in southern Germany, Austria, and northern Italy. These bombers often flew long missions in poor weather conditions, navigating through anti-aircraft fire, enemy fighters, and technical malfunctions. In this context, mistakes happened, and sometimes those mistakes were catastrophic. One of the most infamous incidents occurred on April 1, 1944, when a group of US B-24 bombers dropped dozens of bombs on the town of Schaffhausen in northern Switzerland. 40 civilians were killed, dozens more were wounded, and parts of the town center were leveled. The US quickly acknowledged the error, attributing it to navigational mistakes caused by adverse weather and equipment failure. Pilots had believed they were striking the German city of Ludwigshafen, which lies just across the Rhine. Formal apologies were issued, and the U.S. paid over $4 million in reparations. But Schaffhausen was not an isolated incident. Allied bombers struck Basel, Zurich, Geneva, and several smaller Swiss towns over the course of the war. In February 1945, bombs rained down on Stein am Rhein and Rafs, again causing civilian casualties. In total, more than 70 Swiss civilians were killed in Allied raids, with hundreds injured and millions in damage left behind. Each time, Allied officials pointed to human error, misread maps, malfunctioning instruments, combat confusion. And while many of these explanations are plausible, not all historians accept them as the full story. Declassified documents from the US and Britain, along with post-war investigations by Swiss historians, have fueled speculation that some bombings were more than just tragic accidents. At the time, Switzerland was under intense scrutiny from the Allies for its economic dealings with Nazi Germany. Swiss banks were accepting Nazi gold, including assets looted from occupied countries and Holocaust victims. Swiss factories sold precision instruments, ammunition parts, and other critical materials. Swiss railways were used to transport German soldiers, goods, and possibly even prisoners of war. While officially neutral, Switzerland was, in many Allied eyes, facilitating the German war machine. Some scholars argue that Allied bombing raids, particularly those on rail hubs and industrial centers, were thinly veiled warnings. The goal was not full-scale destruction, but pressure. A signal to the Swiss government: tighten your neutrality, stop supporting Germany, or suffer the consequences. Though the US and Britain never publicly acknowledged such a strategy, these raids had a chilling effect on Swiss officials, who quickly moved to restrict certain exports and stepped up cooperation with Allied intelligence agencies. Domestically, the bombings sparked outrage. Swiss newspapers condemned the attacks. Citizens demanded accountability. Public funerals were held for the victims, and monuments still stand in towns like Schaffhausen to honor the lives lost. Behind closed doors, Swiss diplomats walked a tightrope. They issued firm protests to Allied embassies while working hard to avoid escalating the situation. The Swiss government sought reparations for each attack and pushed for renewed assurances that such incidents would not be repeated. In response, the Allies offered apologies, payments, and in some cases, vague promises of better navigation. Yet, there was also introspection. Within the halls of Bern, questions were raised about whether Switzerland's wartime policies were truly neutral or simply convenient. The bombings forced a reassessment. Economic ties with the Axis were re-evaluated. Intelligence sharing with the Allies increased. By 1944, Switzerland was quietly assisting the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, OSS, feeding intelligence on Axis troop movements and financial dealings. The legacy of the Allied bombings of Switzerland is tangled and emotionally fraught. On the one hand, the incidents were tragic, avoidable errors that claimed innocent lives in a country trying to avoid war. On the other, they exposed the fragile illusion of neutrality during a conflict that had no true sidelines. In the end, the bombings served as both a tragic consequence of war and a subtle nudge that even neutrality has boundaries. Switzerland was never invaded. It never collapsed. Its borders remained intact, and its government never surrendered to external forces. But despite this, it could not entirely shield itself from the reach of war. Its skies were pierced by aircraft bearing foreign flags, its towns shaken by the thunder of unintended bombings, and its people forced to mourn lives lost to a war they did not choose. The aerial raids, though brief and limited compared to the devastation seen elsewhere in Europe, brought the brutal reality of World War II crashing into Swiss soil. Beyond the physical destruction, the psychological and political impact of these bombings left a deeper scar. Switzerland's carefully maintained identity of neutrality was challenged in ways it had never anticipated. Citizens began questioning the true cost of sitting on the fence, while diplomats struggled to reaffirm their nation's position in a world where neutrality no longer guaranteed protection. The bombings became not only a physical intrusion, but also a symbolic rupture, a warning that in a global conflict of such magnitude, even the uninvolved could not remain untouched. The bombings remain a stark reminder of how even nations that claim no part in conflict can still suffer its fallout. They serve as a testament to the unpredictable consequences of war and the fine line that exists between neutrality and vulnerability when powerful nations take to the skies. In the next episode, we uncover one of the war's best-kept secrets: how Switzerland became a quiet stage for high-level negotiations between Nazis and the Allies, talks that helped bring the European conflict to an end.